So it sounds like, from your view,
Yeah.
we're losing the war on terror.
Yeah.
Hi everyone, I'm Ian Bremmer, and this is your GZero world. I'm here right in front of the New York Times global headquarters, where in just a moment, I'm going to go upstairs and talk to foreign correspondent and go-to world on ISIS, Rukmini Callimachi. But first, your world this week. So first to Las Vegas, yet another record. 59 dead, over 500 injured. You've heard, I'm sure, the headlines over and over and over again. One individual and lots of guns. Lots of stories that come out of this. One is, if you're the United States and you're trying to tell other countries what to do and how to live their lives, a lot harder when they're seeing this kind of violence, this kind of dysfunction on display in yet another American city. But in terms of gun control, we should recognize that actually homicides down in the United States over the last 20 years, gun-related deaths in the United States down over the last 20 years. A lot higher than in Europe, certainly than Japan, but no one wants to talk about that story after you have a big mass murder. Then you have the issue of big special interests. And this isn't just about the NRA. How about Big Pharma, the AARP, and why the United States can't possibly have health care that is affordable and functions for its population? In China, the state captures corporations. In the United States, special interests and corporations capture the government. That's ultimately why representative governance doesn't work well for Americans, and why the most important interest coming out of 59 people getting killed is going to continue to be ensuring that the NRA is well serviced. Now to Puerto Rico. Poorer than any American state, but 3.5 million Americans that can vote living there. The third major humanitarian crisis after massive hurricanes hitting Texas and then Florida. This was never going to be easy to do. FEMA, the emergency responders, aren't built to handle 3 storms of this size, but it was made a lot worse by the fact that a lot of Americans don't realize that Puerto Rico is actually part of the United States, and Trump seemed to play right along. Trump's willingness to go after the identity politics issue served him well with the NFL, certainly with his base. It's actually pretty popular among a majority of Americans. But going after Puerto Ricans, even politicized mayor of San Juan who can't stand Trump, that's never a wise thing. And as a consequence, Trump's trip down to Puerto Rico just on Tuesday didn't go so well. Better off allowing the Puerto Ricans to get back on their feet with a lot of support from the American military. The big story going forward is that a lot of these people are going to leave, and they're going to end up in New York. They're going to end up in Florida and places like Tampa. Again, they're going to vote, and that's going to change the way we think about some of these constituencies and where they end up voting in midterm and 2020 elections. And now to Spain. Or should I say Catalonia? At least that's what they'd want me to say. They just had a referendum on independence that was not actually legal. The Spanish courts ruled it against it. What the Prime Minister, Rajoy, should have done is just let them vote and say it's symbolic, it doesn't mean anything. Instead, he plays hardball. He goes against the Catalans, sends in the police. Most of them end up voting anyway, but you've got a whole bunch of police that are striking out against Catalonian citizens. Over 700 injured, only 2 actually hospitalized. But the story and the videos were about the Spanish police cracking heads. That's not exactly what the European Union came together for. Rajoy is in trouble now, and the Catalan government is going to push much more legitimately from the support of their own people now against Madrid. The big takeaway here is that in Spain, just like in Germany, just like in Italy, just like in the UK after Brexit, governance is getting hard, and the central government is seen as less legitimate from a lot of their population. Now you see a lot more Europeans who say you don't represent us. And now, your big interview.
the charter of the city that.
I'm here today at the New York Times boardroom with Rukmini Callimachi. She's the foreign correspondent at the New York Times and go-to journalist on all things ISIS. Rukmini, very good to be with you. Hey, let me start with right now, which is this horrifying act of depravity in Vegas.
Sure.
Which ISIS appears, at least from my perspective, to have absolutely nothing to do with.
Right.
But they claimed that it was them.
They did, yeah.
First of all, I mean, did that come from a real ISIS source, or was this sort of fake news?
It absolutely came from a real ISIS source. So ISIS now has a chain of custody when they put out their claims of responsibility. And typically the first media outlet within ISIS that puts it out is something called the Amaq News Agency. I call it the Associated Press of ISIS. It's basically their wire service. And they put out all of these claims. So it was indeed Amaq in their encrypted channels on the app Telegram that put it out. It was then picked up by something called...
How soon between...
So the attack was around 10 p.m. Sunday night, I believe.
Right.
And it was morning Monday, so less than a day, which is typical. They tend to take 12 to 24 hours to claim things. It was then picked up by Nashir, which is another official ISIS outlet, and from there it was propagated on YouTube, on their channels, in their chat rooms, etc. We're all puzzled, by this claim, and the reason we're puzzled is contrary to I think what people think of ISIS. This is not a group that typically makes inaccurate claims regarding their responsibility in attacks. They do typically exaggerate the death toll. They'll make it out that they had a larger role than they sometimes have. But in terms of claiming credit for things that they or their sympathizers have done, they have generally been correct. And I can give you a number of examples where both officials, the FBI, European intelligence poo-pooed the claim, only
and
for us.
And
probably the most obvious one is soon after the Paris attacks in November of 2015. You might recall that ISIS claimed that they had downed the Metrojet flight that was flying from a resort in Egypt back to Russia, killing several hundred people. Everybody I talked to said that was not possible. And very soon after, ISIS claimed it by one of their regional affiliates. Everybody thought that they were lying, and then not long after, in their magazine, they published images of the type of bomb that they had used. They said that it had been hidden inside of a soft drink inside the plane. And I think it was weeks or months later, the investigation found explosive residue and concluded that it was indeed ISIS.
So look, you have a pet theory at this point as to why they've decided that they want to be responsible for a Vegas attack they had nothing to do with?
I don't. And we don't, of course, we don't yet know. We don't yet know what this guy's motivations were. So what we do know is he was a 64-year-old retiree. That is not the demographic of most ISIS recruits. If you think of an ISIS recruit, it's really somebody like Omar Mateen, the Orlando shooter, young, disaffected, had a problematic personal life, and was deeply into their ideology online. Now, why would they do this? I don't know. But what is of interest is they're really bearing down on it. They're not just making the claim once; they're making it repeatedly. They're having discussions with their own members because their own members are now facing are asking questions.
So that sounds to me like you think maybe there's actually really something there.
Everything says it's not ISIS. The age of the perpetrator, the information that the FBI is giving us, but at the same time, I don't understand why ISIS would go so strongly.
Well, the other thing I guess I would ask is, has ISIS as an organization, since effectively losing their caliphate, have they changed?
I mean, I think there's certainly qualitative differences. I would not say that they've lost their caliphate. So I just want to clarify that one point. I was just in Mosul. I was there for 2 months this summer. I was there on the day that
when it was taken,
when the city was declared liberated. Right. Even after Mosul fell, there was still the city of Tal Afar that has since fallen. Now, just in Iraq, there is still the city of Hawija, the city of Al-Qaim, the Anbar Desert, which is where they came from. right? When I left Mosul a couple of weeks ago, I sent an email to CENTCOM to ask for their assessment of how many fighters were left following the fall of Mosul. And keep in mind, that's just the Iraqi Caliphate. We also have
Not
Syria,
Syria,
right? And they estimated that after the fall of Mosul, there were 10 to 15,000 ISIS fighters left. If you go back through congressional testimony, you'll find out that at the moment when American troops pulled out of Iraq several years ago, they estimated the strength of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which is the group that becomes ISIS, to be around 700 fighters. So we're, even now, after the fall of Mosul, we're 15 times the strength that they emerge from, right? And another comparison, Ali Soufan, FBI special agent, is fond of pointing out that on the eve of 9/11, there were an estimated 200 to 300 Al-Qaeda members worldwide. So what we're seeing with this group is, even, obviously, taking the territory, incredibly important. But even as you take the territory, even as they face devastating losses of leadership, of property, of their riches, of their base, they're still there. And I think that we have not yet figured out exactly how to really handicap this group.
So to go back to the question of how have they changed?
Yes.
And then I want to ask you what motivates them. But what do you see? Because again, it has to be clear. You know, from anyone that looks at ISIS inside the organization, that they're not where they were.
Right.
Even if they're a lot stronger than we still presume they are.
Right.
What has that done to them?
So obviously, their infrastructure is increasingly in disarray. Their media operation is less slick than it used to be. So one possible theory for what's happened in Vegas is that they've become sloppy. They've made 2 other errors, at least, in the past 6 months. They claimed an attack in Paris that never happened. They claimed one in the Philippines that also was not ISIS-related. So possibly, you know, as they're losing territory and personnel, perhaps their capacity to project their power and to provide the services that they've always provided as a media outlet, as an organization that holds territory, is also being eroded. But the thing about ISIS is in the end, this is an idea. I don't think we have found a way yet to shoot our way out of an idea. And because it's an idea, it's malleable. So even though they claim that the caliphate, the territorial caliphate, you know, was really their end all, they have, in the wake of losing Mosul, they have very craftily basically moved the goalpost. They're now talking about the caliphate in our hearts. You know, the caliphate remains, the territory, it's no longer a territory that's just on the ground, it's etched in our hearts. And Abu Muhammad al-Adnani, who was their charismatic spokesman who was killed last year, in one of his final speeches, he talked about how, he talked about when will we declare defeat? He said, will we declare defeat when you grab the territory from us? Will you declare defeat when every last one of our leaders will be dead? He said, you will only declare defeat over us when you have ripped the Quran out of the hearts of Muslims. So again, you know, they believe that they're fighting for Muslims. And so they're very protean. And even as they lose ground, they manage to regenerate themselves.
Are you finding you know, sort of similar stories in how we are motivating and creating this extraordinarily disaffected group?
Right. I think the common thread that I'm seeing in the young men, and they're almost always young men that I'm speaking to, the common thread is contrary to popular perception. They really do mean what they're doing. Right? They're not joining ISIS because they were dumped by their girlfriend and, you know, and it's a way to, you know, get back at the world, or because there were some sort of school dropout and had no place in the society. They're joining it because it means something to be part of what they think is going to be this Muslim Renaissance. They once they enter sort of this, you know, this echo chamber of ISIS acolytes, they very quickly learn to shut themselves off from any external media. They call people like me and you, I guess, the kuffar media, the infidel media, the crusader media. So everything we put out is wrong. Everything, we are agents of our governments. So anything that we put out is obviously untrue. And then inside this echo chamber, they are led to believe that ISIS is bringing back a Muslim golden age, a place where Muslims are going to be honored and powerful and lead an empire like they did hundreds of years ago. And because the killings are only aimed at the other, right? So the killings are of non-Sunni Muslims in their eyes. Of course, Sunni Muslims are also being killed, but this is what they're led to believe. It somehow makes it okay. It's Christians that are being killed. It's Jews that are being killed. They're spies. They're out to get Muslims, and the ones that I'm speaking to, of course, are somewhat self-selected because their ability or willingness to speak to somebody like me means that at some level they've pulled out of the ideology, right? And so I'm seeing them at the point where they have been somewhat disenchanted,
and
with the group.
what's disenchanting? Just the horrible conditions? Or?
So the stories that I gather from them over and over again involve a disillusionment that comes at the moment when they realize that Sunni Muslims are also
getting targeted.
Are also being mistreated. So, for example, one member of ISIS who I spoke to, who was involved in executions, talked about how he saw the crucifixions, he saw the beheadings, and he somehow justified them as being the bad guys. And then one day he was pulled on execution duty, and the men that they brought in front of him were older men, and they were protesting and saying to him, we're Sunnis, don't kill us, we're Sunnis, we're just like you. And the gun was in his hand, and he had to go ahead and do it. And that really worked him over. Suddenly he's like, oh, wait a second, if I'm also killing Sunni Muslims, then what are we doing? We're killing everybody.
But even the enslavement of women,
it's
the
again,
multiple rapes, again, that level of atrocity doesn't matter as long as against the enemy, it's okay. They've swallowed that all.
So it's always against somebody other than their group.
So it's only when they see hypocrisy on the part of their own leadership.
I mean, it's not only, but that seems to be the the pulling out story that I find, at least the most convincing one. The ones that have really turned their backs on the group. I've also spoken to ISIS emirs, deputy emirs who are in prison now in Iraq and Syria, and who remain, really quite deep in the ideology and quite arrogant in their assessment that no, these things are not happening. There are no abuses under ISIS. I actually spoke to one ISIS emir just before coming back here. He was the police chief of a small town outside of Mosul, and he looked very down. When I was talking to him, and I said to him, "You look kind of distressed. What's wrong?" And he said, I really believe them when they said that because we believe in God, Muslims are going to be victorious. I never thought that I'd be sitting here in handcuffs. I mean, it's really like a shock to me. Okay. Do you think that ISIS should have done anything differently? He said, yes, I think we should have tried to find more job opportunities for people under rule. Crucifixions, that was okay. Beheadings, that was okay. Enslavement of Yazidi women, all fine. We should have just had a few more job opportunities, right?
Yeah.
This is how deeply this guy is in this particular world.
So it sounds like, from your view,
Yeah.
we're losing the war on terror.
Yeah, I mean, from my view, we're doing all sorts of things that seem to make sense. We're going after the leadership. We're pulling back their territory. We're trying to cut down on their presence online, and yet the group just keeps on burgeoning, both of them. Right, and I don't actually have an answer. I don't know what needs to happen in order to fix this problem. All I know is that despite these various efforts, we're kind of just treading water.
You're right now. You are talking with an active member of ISIS. What's that like?
In order to do this job, I've had to compartmentalize, many aspects of my life. For example, if I stop to think about what he thinks of women, and that I am a woman, there's very little that we can talk about. When I stop to think about what his idea is of how Yazidi girls, some as young as 8 or 9, have been treated, there's nothing to talk about because I would just feel angry, right? So I sort of have to just put these things aside and really just be a reporter and go to him for information. He's been useful to me in terms of reading statements that are being put out by ISIS. For example, right now he's telling me there's last week he messaged me to say that ISIS has captured 2 Russian soldiers and that they're preparing to burn them, like the Jordanian pilot. This is stuff, these are conversations that don't end up in my reporting, because what would I, what's the point of putting out something so horrific like that? Just today, ISIS put out an official statement showing a proof of life of these two soldiers, and he is telling me that they've actually been burned alive. So, I mean, it's information I take in, and I try to use it to get my bearings, in this group, and understand what's what and what's coming, and also on things like Vegas. I go to him for guidance. Do you believe this? Is this real? And try to suss out what they're saying.
You've spent your life getting much closer to them than anyone that's watching the show will have done.
For sure.
How has that changed your view of them?
The major change came to me in 2013, which was the year that I was able to get to Timbuktu right after Al-Qaeda had left the city. Before I was there, and before I collected their documents and began actually studying them up close, my impression of them was that they were just a bunch of guys in a cave, just these kind of Neanderthal people, backward-minded, monolithic in their thinking. And the documents I had in front of me showed me, for example, that they were required to turn in monthly expense reports. I had the disciplinary letter that was sent to a very famous member of Al-Qaeda in Africa, where he was being reprimanded for not having turned in his monthly expense report. He was always late turning in his expenses. And so I suddenly saw that they're acting a little bit like a corporation, that they have financial rules, right? So you see them thinking it through, right? And
so
having
it's like the revolutionary versus the pragmatic wing in any government.
In any
right?
government,
Yeah.
exactly, in any government. That was sort of the moment, when I realized, okay, there's more to this than that. And ISIS is many revolutions beyond that. Their caliphate ran, I think, 14 ministries. The Ministry of Taxation, the Ministry of the Treasury, the Ministry of Agriculture, and these actually ran. I have interviewed people who were employed in these ministries, where they had stamps and acted like bureaucrats. So in many ways, it really did act like a state that nobody recognized. So I guess my big takeaway is I don't underestimate them anymore. I don't make fun of them anymore. I see them as far more complicated and textured, and I hate to say it, but sophisticated than we typically give them credit for.
Well, a state that nobody recognizes, there's not much more GZero than that. Rukmini, thank you very much.
Thank you, my pleasure. Thank you for coming here.
Super Luigi!